Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, the climate baby dilemma. As climate change prompts more severe weather events, the issue has been foisted on families, whether by experiencing its effects or by having to make changes in their own lives. Some have even wrestled with the question of whether to have children amid the climate crisis. Today in our series, Baby Bumps and Road Humps, how is climate change affecting young families in BC? How does it impact how you raise your kids? We'll hear from Severin Cullis-Suzuki and we'll take your calls. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming as well on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. And a big welcome to some grade 9 students who are here on set with us today as part of Take Your Kids to Work Day. There are about 8 or 10 of them. Hello, thanks for joining us. Nice to have you with us. And I hope that some of you have an interest in journalism someday. It is now 12:07. 107 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Well, the summer's wildfire season has been dubbed the worst in BC's recorded history, and scientists say climate change played a significant role. Residents in some BC communities have yet to rebuild, including in Keefers, which is a remote railway town in the Fraser Canyon and home to just 5 families. Now, they were impacted by the Kukipee Creek wildfire in the Nahatlatch Valley. Sarah Johnston moved back to Keefers with her husband, their son, and his young family a couple of years ago, and their home burnt down. She spoke with the CBC's Joel Ballard about what happened when the fire that the BC Wildfire Service had already considered held erupted on August 17th.
It was getting a little bit close, so I sort of took a last video as we were leaving just because I kind of thought, if it's not a drill, then... But yeah, we did in our back of our minds just think that it was just going to be grab a few things and come back.
And when you did finally get to come back and see what had happened, what went through your mind?
It was just very devastating. So I think it took me a long time to process it. We haven't, I don't know, I think I'm still kind of realizing that we actually don't have anything left at all. We don't have our business, we don't have our home. My son and daughter had to move, so they moved to the States because they lost their home and he didn't have work here, so they went somewhere where they had a place to stay. Yep. So it's kind of missed the whole having my grandbaby close by, and yeah, just a lot of loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what did it look like?
Yeah, everything was gone. It looked like my husband and my sons came to clean it up, but it was just giant piles of rubble. So it was just, we didn't know we had that much metal. And so it took these men right now that are working here, cleaned up our place first, and it took them 1 full day, 1.5 days of 2 rock trucks, just removing the metal and dumping it at the dump.
Yeah. So what are you doing now?
We don't know. Right now we just got it cleaned up, and we are going to stay with my parents for the winter because we can't stay in our trailer. It'd just be too cold, too much propane. So we don't know. We're hoping to rebuild.
Sarah Johnston's Keefers home and her son's home burned down in the Kukipee wildfire back in August. Now, a local NGO called Resolve Canada has called the area the front line of climate change. Now, we're asking you, how is climate change affecting how you raise your family? Have you wrestled with the question of having children because of the climate crisis? And do you or your children struggle with the feeling of climate anxiety? You can share your thoughts with us. It's 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me is someone with firsthand experience as well. Shannon Christensen has faced this personally and in her work. She's a founder of a group called Mamas for Mamas, and she joins me now. Good afternoon, Shannon.
Good afternoon.
Very nice to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell me how the wildfire season affected you?
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. It impacted just about every part of my life and every part of my neighbors. It was the mamas for mamas community. It was the women who were already struggling with poverty and invisible homelessness, and they were even further displaced. And there was
Mm.
my family, as big mama, my job is to be out there and make sure I am looking after everybody who is falling through the cracks. Anybody who was looking for help, didn't know where to get it, or was looking for help and wasn't able to access it.
Mm.
And it was our job to step in to really help make sure they could get food and water, and the firefighters had everything they needed. And it's difficult to do when you're displaced yourself. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful my home is okay, grateful that I was only on evacuation alert and not on an order. But it was an interesting time of all of the helpers getting together and occasionally having to run home to evacuate their own houses, only to come back with their families and all of their items to keep fighting the good fight.
Tell me more about where your house is, and what wildfire did have an impact on you, and why you were on evacuation alert.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really didn't think we were at any risk in the beginning because it was over in West Kelowna and I live
Hmm.
by the airport. So I'm over by
Okay.
Lake Country area. I'm
Right.
a little bit further out. So I thought, perfect. I'm in a position where I can just get out there and help everybody from the West Side community. And there's no way it's going to jump the lake. I mean, what kind of fire jumps the lake?
Everybody thought that,
Uh,
didn't they?
yeah, so it turns
Yeah.
out this fire jumps the lake, and
Yeah.
we got really galvanized very quickly when we realized there was going to be a whole extra set of families who were going to be displaced, who
Wow.
were quite a lot less prepared. And those were
Mm.
individuals on the other side by Lake Country, and I'm over by Lake Country area. So it started to kind of close us in, and the highways started to close off, which was, I think, probably the scariest part, because then how do you get out? I mean, it
Hmm.
was literally catching fire in a circular motion around Kelowna, and so we were really and truly just making sure that our team knew that they could go as soon as they needed to kind of get their stuff together. But we had a plan to all go together. We have a lot of single moms on our team. We have a lot of people that don't have the same access to big vehicles and stuff like that.
Right.
So I felt it was important that we all had, you know, a preparation plan to get out together.
What is the work that you do, and what help were you able to provide?
Well, Mamas for Mamas is a specialized poverty relief agency, and our whole mission is to catch people who are falling through the cracks. And so we met people where they were right in that moment. We helped them access the emergency services that were already available. And there were quite a few emergency services that people couldn't access in a timely manner, or they were going to be without shelter, without safety, without food. So we provided shelter, safety, and food. We also provided this really intensive operation where people could drop off their in-kind items, and we would process them and get them out to the firefighters, the other frontline workers. We could hold stuff for other individuals and other organizations that just didn't have the space but would need the other pallet of water in 2 or 3 days.
Hmm.
So we acted as a primary processing place for all of the donations coming in for the wildfires. But like moms do, we just made sure that anybody who was not sure where to go, didn't have enough, came to Mamas, and we filled the gap.
How did the wildfire, and I guess the thought of having your life so disrupted, being displaced, not sure if you're going to have a home to return to, emotionally, what was the impact on the moms you worked with and their kids?
You know what? The impact was very intense, and it still is. And that's something that I think we need to remember as a collective, is we all just went through a pretty massive trauma. And we're not over it yet. The nervous system takes quite a while to come out of that stage of fight or flight. And I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of these moms are finally coming out of their fight or flight. And that's when all the feelings are starting to come in. They had to shut it off to deal with the big stuff in the moment. And right now, the kids and the moms and the dads and anybody who was impacted, including frontline workers, are feeling a bit of that compassion burnout, that fatigue. And so, right now is the time that we need to be giving extra love and attention and care to caregivers who've gone through this, because
Yeah.
they've held the weight for themselves and for their kids.
You yourself have had some of these conversations with your children.
Yeah, I absolutely have. And, the most important thing for me was that they knew that, like, I got you. Mama's got you. Yes, this is scary. Yes, this is unknown, but what do parents do is we make sure our kids know that it's going to be okay, even if we don't know that it's going to be okay. Holding that strong patient nervous system for them so that they can have that safe place to reflect back their feelings, and they know that even if the world is falling apart, mom's got this, or dad's got this, or grandma's got this. And that's why it was so important for us to have those conversations with our kids. I have two kids, well, I have three kids, but two that live at home. And one was, quite calm and collected and very pragmatic about the whole thing, wanted to know the escape route and what our plans were. And the other one wanted to know if there was enough room for the gecko and the bird and the dogs
Oh,
and
yeah.
the partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah. Has this changed anything about how you approach climate change since then with your
Yeah, it
family?
actually has changed how we approach everything, I would say.
Mm.
We're always very cognizant in our family about leaving the earth better than how we got it, and I don't think that's something that my kids can confidently say they can do, like I said that we could do in my generation, because things have
Mm.
just gotten so much worse. And so every single day we make an effort to love Mother Earth a little bit deeper, a little bit more consciously. We're growing a lot of our own food. We're doing a lot of things that aren't even necessarily related to directly the impact we make on climate change, but it's spending less time and money going to the grocery store because I'm growing more food at home. It's spending more time and energy researching local grocers and, like, buying a cow with a couple friends instead of constantly going and spending gas and time and money and emissions to kind of contribute to that mass production environment. It's
Wow.
very important for me to put my money where my mouth is. And for me, that's shopping local. That is being conscious and cognizant of fast fashion and how I contribute to, the well-being of the earth. And I love thrift shopping. And at Mamas for Mamas, we have this karma market that is, really beautiful items that are secondhand or sometimes new, that we save from the landfill, that we just really truly recycle and put back into the economy at $0 to the family. So it's just
Wow.
kindness is the currency at the karma market.
Well, it's really become top of mind, and I can see you're a determined person, Shannon. Thank you so
I
much.
am,
I really appreciate your joining us. Thank you very much.
of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All the best to you.
You too.
Shannon Christensen is founder of a group called Mamas for Mamas in the Kelowna area, in West Kelowna. We are asking you for your calls, your thoughts, given the concerns around climate change, the impact of climate change. How is the climate crisis affecting your family? And did you wrestle with that question of having children in the first place, given the climate crisis? How does climate anxiety affect you and your kids? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. We're going to hear from Severn Cullis Suzuki in just a couple of minutes. Right now, Rob joins us on the phone from Vancouver. Hi, Rob. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yeah, how does this weigh on you?
I think, and what I'm about to say, it could be controversial, and I only direct it towards those who haven't yet had children. Even if you just had recently children, I don't have any judgments or anything. But I think it's something to seriously think about if one should have children. Two reasons. The first, overpopulation is a big factor in environmental stressors. Used to be a big message of the environmental movement in the 80s, and they basically dropped it because they knew it was just too controversial, and they wanted to focus on, CO2. But it is still a big issue. And the second is that, as we've seen in recent years here in Canada with the heat dome and Lytton and forest fires, and this past year, the forest fires right across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I see, one study came out taking a look at this big Atlantic current, and it's just one study, but it's the first one to really look at this Atlantic current closely. They think it might collapse. It's going to collapse this century, maybe as soon as 2 years from now, which will bring colder winters to the Europe and U.S. and hotter temperatures to the equator around the globe. So it's just like, what kind of a world is one going to bring their children into? I have a friend who has children, and she really stresses about this. You know, like she had them. You know, they're around 10. They're tween and then almost a tween. So she had them a while back, but now things have been getting very worrying in terms of climate change in recent years. So I think it's something to really think about, the normal reasons one may want to have children. You got to think about, wow, what kind of world or what kind of life are they going to have? Are they going to come into a time of just climate chaos?
These are important questions, and it does seem like more and more people are talking about it, Rob. Thank you very much for your call.
Yeah, thanks.
That's Rob in Vancouver. And yes, a growing number of young people do say the climate crisis is affecting their decision about whether or not to have kids. And this was the focus of a CBC documentary last year. It was called The Climate Baby Dilemma. Here's a clip narrated by Britt Ray, who's author of the book Generation Dread. And it features comments from Peyton Mitchell, who's co-founder of Climate Strike Canada.
The two main reasons that people kind of align with their concerns about having kids because of climate change relate to what a new kid does to a planet that's already overburdened with a variety of ecological problems, and what a changing planet does to a new kid. I find far more people are concerned with what a warming world will do to a kid than that kind of guilt factor related to carbon footprint.
I grew up beside a coal power plant, which was the highest polluter in Canada. And I had horrible asthma. After seeing, the stress that my mom went through dealing with that, the long days at the hospital that I spent, I don't necessarily feel like I want to put somebody else through that. I know from the research that I've done that in 10 years, she's going to be unwell. I would love to have kids. That's not the point. The point is that if I were to be pregnant in 2030, I don't know what would happen to me. Would I be able to safely carry a pregnancy to term? And if it wasn't a miscarriage, would they be healthy moving into their childhood? And then after that, would they be safe to live in a world where there's climate catastrophe? And so I don't feel comfortable bringing children into a world if I don't know how I can take care of them in that world, because that's your main role as a parent.
You can search for that documentary, The Climate Baby Dilemma, on CBC Gem. Well, we are asking you, how is climate change affecting how you raise your family? And have you wrestled with that question of having children because of the climate crisis? Do you or your children struggle with climate anxiety? We'll take your calls in a few minutes. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. Right now, I'm joined by Severn Cullis Suzuki. She's a climate activist and executive director of the David Suzuki Foundation. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
You've been a climate activist for several decades now, since childhood, and you have children. And when you're listening to that clip, and I know you were involved in that documentary as well, how did your experience as a climate activist, how did that factor into your decision around having kids?
Oh, well, this is certainly such an intense and personal issue. And I can feel, just listening to the last few commentators and callers, I can feel in my body, the emotion and the anxiety that this conversation produces. And I think that just the fact that our young people and young adults are having this conversation and talking about whether or not to have children, it's a huge wake-up call to our whole society. I mean, this is a huge indicator of how profoundly the current climate crisis is affecting people. I think if we think about the human species and what each generation it has responsibility for, it's to ensure that the world is viable for your children, to try to control everything that you can, to give all you can in terms of security to your children, to the next generation. And here our young people are saying we cannot provide that security.
Right.
It's an indictment. So that is what think we really need to focus on, what is not working in society that we cannot provide. That I think it's a sacred responsibility of every living generation, and that's what's on the table right now.
So does this actually, as a parent, does it actually contribute to motivating you then?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I have chosen to bring children into this world, and this is an intensely personal discussion. I was not unaware of what the predictions for the future are. But what I think that this very conversation is a call to action. It's a call to generations in power to listen to our young people and to honor that responsibility. It's a wake-up call. We're failing our younger generations, and we have to change that. Action is the only option, and that's what we have to do. Is we have to show our younger generations who are grappling with this decision that yes, we're honoring our promises. Yes, we're doing everything that we can to ensure that the future is viable.
I remember when I had kids, it was, thinking about consumption and waste, thinking about using cloth diapers, for example, that I sort of focused on that. This was 15 years ago. How can parents now actually do something? What is that action you're talking about?
We all have to do two things. We have to do the personal and we have to do the political. So the personal is, actually acting in our own lives. And it was beautiful to hear the Mamas for Mamas. I was so inspired by Shannon and the other people who are being on the front lines, taking care of people, and then building that into your daily life, reducing your own ecological footprint. It's not only important for reducing our footprint on the earth, but it's also essential to show our children that you can do something. And for me personally, this was absolutely critical. I was a kid in the 80s, and there were so many environmental crises at that time. It was more focused around logging and pollution. We weren't talking as much about the global collective impacts, but the impacts that we were seeing were very real. And I had a huge amount of anxiety as a child. And if my mother in particular hadn't shown me some things that I could do, I think I could have been lost to hopelessness and despair, because I was a very sensitive child. And so being able to do something is absolutely key. And so we've got to take those personal actions. Kids are so amazing at integrating and seeing the solutions. I mean, it's easy. Let's grow our food. Let's reduce our garbage. Let's buy secondhand. Let's reduce our consumption. I mean, these are basic things that kids can actually take the lead on for a family. So that action is key. That's the personal. Then the political. We need systemic change. We need a cap on Canada's oil and gas emissions. We need to advocate for systemic regulations for getting our society off of what I call fossil fuel supremacy. Fossil fuel supremacy being a whole set of intersecting systems that lock us into the expansion of fossil fuel projects, no matter what the impacts are on human health or our children's future. And that's what we got to end.
Severin Suzuki, it's very good to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
You take care. That's Severin Suzuki, climate activist and executive director of the David Suzuki Foundation. It's about 12:30 now, 1:30 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We're on Radio 1, 88.1 FM in Metro Vancouver, live streaming as well on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and you can use YouTube to watch us as well. Just search for CBC Vancouver. We're going to take more of your calls in our next half hour as we ask you, how is climate change affecting your family? Have you wrestled with the question of having children because of climate change? How do you deal with climate anxiety, that climate grief we hear about in your own family? And this as BC Today continues our look this week at the challenges faced by young families in the province. We're calling it Baby Bumps and Road Humps. So we go to your calls, and two more guests joining us to take your calls after this CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Developer Holborn has been given the go-ahead to redevelop the Little Mountain site without the social housing commitments in the first phase. Vancouver Council voted 7-3 along party lines in favor of lifting the restrictions. The site has remained relatively empty for more than 10 years after Holborn demolished the existing housing and promised to build 1,400 market homes and 234 social housing units. The Prime Minister has appointed former Premier John Horgan as the next Canadian ambassador to Germany. Justin Trudeau says Horgan has a proven track record of dedicated public service. Horgan spent 5 years as Premier and stepped down after being diagnosed with throat cancer. And police in Colwood on Vancouver Island say kids may have been mistakenly given Parkinson's medication rather than treats last night. RCMP say they got a call from a senior after they realized several white pills and yellow boxes were missing. Mounties are urging parents to check their kids' Halloween candy. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Cloudy and windy this afternoon with a high of 9. Highs reaching 5 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, mainly cloudy with a high of 3 degrees. Highs from 1 to 6 and cloudy in the West Kootenay. A bit of sunshine in the East Kootenay. In the southern interior, cloudy with a high of 3. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, mainly cloudy this afternoon with a high of 11. Lots of rain starting tonight. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us here on BC Today. We air on radio, CBC Radio 1. You can catch us live streaming as well on our website, cbc.ca/BC, on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, or you can use the CBC Gem streaming service. And we are continuing our series on the show, looking into the challenges faced by young families in BC. We're calling it baby bumps and road humps. And when it comes to those road humps, we are focusing on the climate crisis today, asking you, how is it affecting your own family? Have you wrestled with that question of having children amid the climate crisis? And does climate anxiety affect you or your children? And what do you do about it? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone or email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Maria is joining us next, calling in from Valemount. Hello, Maria. Thanks for calling in, Maria. What are your thoughts on the climate crisis and how it affects families?
Well, it affects my family in several ways. First of all, I am the mother of 3 firefighters who do that for a long time. And my oldest son used to be a firefighter many years ago. And there is not even a comparison to make between the challenges that they are facing today compared to when he was a firefighter in decision making, or for me as a mom worrying about their health and safety when they're out there.
I can imagine.
That's the first point. The second point, I'm also a very small farmer in Valemount, and Valemount is already dry and has poor soil. And but I kept my herd small all those years, and I was able to not need to feed hay to my animals over the summer months, let's say 5-6 months a year.
Despite the shortage, yeah.
Yeah. This year, I had to feed hay for 11 months. Because we had such a drought in July. So the only months where I didn't feed any hay at all was June. And I had, of course, to shorten my herd even more. And it's not good. And my third point is I am also a grandmother and have 3 lovely granddaughters. And you look at them and you wonder how their life will look like. You want them to have a childhood as you provided for your children, but you worry. And it makes me mad when I see how so often when you look at industry, everything seems to be business as usual. And often when politicians talk about the climate change and what they're doing about it, it's often just big talk, but no action. And I also have this Trans Mountain pipeline going straight to my property and was, I would say, almost the only outspoken opponent all those years. because there's too much money to be made by other people, by businesses, hotels, restaurants, and so on. And it's very hard to look at that, and you see as a simple, small person that you can have no way to change it.
How, my goodness, my heart just breaks when you describe how, what future you see for your 3 grandchildren.
Yeah.
Do you have conversations with them about that?
They are a little bit too small still, and I mean, they come in and they're smiling and having plans about Halloween or whatever it was, and my youngest is only 8 months living with us, and you look at them and you love them so much, and you just so far we cannot. It would just make them sad if you would talk too much about it. They are too young for it. The other 2 are 7 and 3. But I have seen enough over my lifespan to be really worried about their future.
You've made 3 really important points, Maria. Thank you so much for calling in.
You're very welcome.
That's Maria joining us from Valemount. Our next caller is Avery from Vancouver. Hi, Avery. Good afternoon. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, thank you for having.
How does this issue affect you? Hi, Avery.
Hello.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, yes.
Okay. Pardon me. You cut out there for a little
topic,
bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I do a lot of activism, and climate grief is something that really, really drives me into that. I don't know how I can't act when I see everyone being impacted, especially those most vulnerable, those who are made marginalized by society, who are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. I've worked in Indigenous sovereignty and intersectional climate justice, and intersectional because climate change affects all aspects of someone's life, especially when they're facing barriers such as poverty, disability, class. All these different elements play into how different people are affected by climate change. And I hear my family or my friends, young people like myself who want to potentially start families, my peers, and their climate anxiety is palpable when they are musing about having children. And I understand that. I have always regarded bringing children into the world as one of the biggest responsibilities one can take on.
Wow. That is a lot that you're weighing. How do you feel when you do hear both things, right? Your friends talking about perhaps wanting children, that on their mind, as well as dealing with the climate grief that you describe?
There's a big mix of emotions there. One of the things that is, drives me is frustration, because we know the solutions that need to happen. We know that we need systems to change. We need policy to change. We need to hold the biggest culprits of emissions accountable. And instead, it's being put onto individuals to make, big changes in their life instead of, which I agree is important, but we also need to examine, the ratio of who is contributing to emissions and who is impacting climate change.
Avery, can I ask how old you are?
I just turned 25.
You just turned 25. Well, happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry that we're talking about these things, in this context. But so when you think about that, you said, where the responsibility lies. How do you feel about these, life-defining kinds of decisions that changed your, the trajectory of your life and what it might look like, being so significantly affected by this issue that, as you say, you feel can be addressed if only there were these policies and policy changes?
Yeah. I do have a smidge of optimism in me, so part of me feels hopeful that, we will be able to take action and, make it so that people in, my age bracket and my communities and myself feel that it is, a reasonable and responsible and okay thing to do to bring a life into the world that we are living in. But I worry that isn't the case, especially with the lack of action that is currently being taken.
Wow, Avery, it is really, really good to hear from you. Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you.
Good to hear that perspective. That's Avery joining us from Vancouver as we ask you, how is the climate crisis affecting you, your family? Questions around whether to have children in the first place amid the climate crisis and the impacts of climate change, and how is that climate grief affecting you or your children? How do you address that and have that discussion with them? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. I have two guests now joining me for this discussion. Megan Wise is coordinator at UBC's Climate Hub, and Kai Chan is professor at UBC's Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us. I know you were listening and watching as Avery was speaking there. What was going through your mind, Megan?
A lot of empathy. A lot of solidarity for those types of challenges that youth particularly are facing in regards to climate change. There's some big challenges, and they're very nuanced and intersectional, as they were saying. So thinking about the grief, thinking about the trauma, thinking about the many different facets of this. So thinking about it from a systems lens. I know Severin earlier was talking about systems change, needing those deeper shifts. And so recognizing too that we know a lot of youth across not just our own communities, but globally, are really struggling with the mental health and well-being impacts of climate change, and then thinking about all of the other systems and layers of crises that are interconnected to climate change, but then also other things on top of that as well. And so how to support and navigate that, I think, is how we need to come together to think about what are those strategies? How are we supporting each other in moving through these challenges?
Okay, I'd love to talk about what those strategies are with you in a moment. Kai Chen, and we speak with you many times on this program and others about climate change. What are your thoughts about this issue when it comes to the prospect of having a family, raising kids? What were you thinking as you listened to Avery there as they wrestled with these questions?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking and also inspiring, right? Because it's just about the first time in the last couple of 100 years that many generations are agreeing that the future generations may not have it as good as we have had it up to this point. For so long, we've understood this kind of inevitable progress, that humanity is on this upward trajectory. And now we're not feeling that. And it's many of us, right? And it reflects in people's decisions to question whether they're going to take that responsibility that Avery mentioned of bringing children into this world. And the inspiring bit is that people like Avery are finding hope in action. And I think that's a really common thread, right? That in the face of something that's really big, even if you can't accomplish it on your own, even just working towards a better world in those ways is actually enough to bring hope, right? Where otherwise that space might be filled with hopelessness. So yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I'd say it's more than just policy. It is about those systems, and that's going to require changes in law, as well as changes in the systems that Avery mentioned as well. And it's not just climate as well. It's this constellation of climate and an ecological crisis, where every single way that we experience the effects of climate change with fires and droughts and floods, each one of those is equally due to how we've managed ecosystems, not just climate at the global scale.
And then dealing with the impacts and the disproportionate impacts of them too. And Kai, you speak with your students about this. You have kids of your own. How do you approach that conversation?
It is really hard, and it was so interesting with the first caller who mentioned that her grandchildren are young, and so she's not talking to them about it.
Yeah.
And we struggled with the same thing. It's like, when do you bring it up for kids? When they're really young, you worry that it's just going to be overwhelming, that it's going to fill them with this climate anxiety and climate grief, and they won't have any sense of what to do about it. But how long do you wait, right? Like, when can you bring them into that? You don't want to raise them in such a way that they aren't aware of what's going on in the world, and are told they don't need to worry about what's happening to the world, because obviously somebody does, and it's inspiring to see the action that young people have taken. So, a big part of what we talk about in both with my students as well as with my own daughters is the importance of that action and finding community in that action, of not giving up despite the signs of the real science that supports what I said earlier, that people do find hope in those communities of action. And that, although it is a really complex change that we're going to have to navigate, there are lots of people who realize that those changes have to take place. So there's lots of reason to be hopeful.
Let's take another call now, asking you how the climate crisis is affecting young families in BC. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Brent is joining us from Langley. Hi, Brent. Welcome.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I made the decision about 40 years ago not to have children. I didn't want to bring children onto a dying planet. I didn't want to watch the environment slowly deteriorate for them. The other thing I think is that I think we have about more than 50% too many people that are just sustainable for this planet right now. And unless we do something about overpopulation, we're probably doomed.
Brent, thank you very much. And
You're very welcome.
Yeah, take care. That's Brent in Langley. Why don't I go back to my guests on that very difficult, as we started out, it's a difficult conversation to have. Severin Kala Suzuki said it is a very personal decision as well. So how do you reconcile the impact of a growing population and the demand on resources and the output of emissions on what's needed to be done? How do you reconcile those things?
I'll jump in really quickly, and Kai, please jump in as well.
Go ahead, Megan.
I think it's really important, first of all, that we be very mindful about overpopulation narratives and thinking about how those can be wielded potentially in problematic ways. And so thinking about how we support people in understanding what it means to move through those really profoundly personal choices about having a family, starting a family, raising a family. Thinking about the types of systems, going back, I've been hearing this constant theme of systems coming up. And it's not necessarily having kids that is the core issue. It's that we have unsustainable systems that we rely on and draw from that make it unsustainable to have the population or that kind of thing. And so it's not necessarily the issue of having kids. It's we need to address the systems that are fundamentally not serving our society in just ways. When we think of overconsumption, when we think about the types of energy systems, again, thinking about fossil fuels, we have the technologies to make deep shifts that would really support a different type of population support in a much more sustainable way. And so I think we need to shift this away, maybe potentially partly away from this individualized perception of should you or shouldn't you do that, to really focusing on some of that attention on our systems, saying, are these the right systems we need to be a sustainable civilization? And the answer there in many cases is no. And so we know there can be changes there. And so I think we really do need to focus on how we collectively come together to address some of those systems changes. And again, thinking about that through Accountability, what does that mean? Who holds the power to do these deep system changes? Who's in power politically? Who has policy-making power? How do we rally and mobilize around quick mobilizations to really get at some of these systems that are driving the inability for us to want to have children in this world? So I'll start there with just being mindful of that overpopulation narrative and where we maybe need to direct some attention and care to systems as well. And happy to hear what Kai has to say on that as well.
Yes, and I can see Kai nodding there as you're speaking. So much that I'm hearing through this conversation is the personal and the political, right? Severin Kala-Suzuki made that point. Avery made that point as well. Kai, what are your thoughts?
I totally agree with Megan. It's entirely about those systems. And even the question of how many people the Earth can support is in a sense not really the question, right? Or at least the one that matters. The question is how many people can the Earth support to live at a given level, right? And so any individual is going to answer that question in a different way because they're going to have a different level at which they imagine that we should be able to support human life, right? I mean, this planet could probably support 20 billion people, but their lives might be so impoverished that life wouldn't really be worth living. And so then when people make those decisions upon themselves, that since life isn't really worth living, then they're going to have fewer kids. Well, what that does is it means that, let me turn this around. The way that I talk to my own daughters who, selfishly, I kind of like them to have kids, is to point out that if you are in a position where you can raise kids so that they can be good global citizens, they can understand those systems that are problematic and they can work towards fixing those systems. In a sense, I think we have a responsibility to bring those people into this world, to sustain humanity with those who will work as stewards for both people and nature. And I think when you think about it that way, it's we can't only leave future generations to those who don't even know they have a choice, and let everybody else who was worried about it opt out. We need to make sure that we are together shepherding the future.
We actually have a caller on the line talking about some of those actions about shepherding into the future. Kim joins us from Duncan. Hi, Kim. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much. We just want to put a shout out there that you can bring these ideas together in a way that people can adopt them, and even families, people of all ages can learn, for example, how to behave as consumers, how to consider other energy sources. So in my neighborhood, in my community, we're doing something called a climate cafe. So it's called the Cowichan Climate Cafe. And a number of groups are coming together this Sunday afternoon in a very welcoming and relaxed way to explore these topics. So offering, over tables, almost like a round table feeling with coffee, tea, and snacks, just sharing those ideas and supporting one another. And I think that by offering hope and action, and not just preaching to the choir, of course, but really making it accessible to residents and families, that they can make these choices and that these resources exist for them to explore on their own if they're interested. I think that brings a lot of hope. And I was invited as sort of a late admission as an outlier. So I'm from Shawnigan Lake and was able to found a whole Rotary Service Club around the concept of being an eco club, an environmentally based stewardship club, if you will, and we're the first of our kind in Canada. So I also see that as a huge, hopeful move within a volunteering organization.
Kim, great to hear from you as well in Duncan. So that's this Sunday, your Cowichan.
This Sunday, 11 till 12:30 at the community center here.
Okay, great to hear from you. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
That's Kim joining us from Duncan. We are wrapping our conversation here with our guests, and we're discussing that question of the impact of the climate crisis on young families. My guest, Megan Wise, coordinator at UBC's Climate Hub, Kai Chan, professor at UBC's Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability. Megan, you talked about action earlier, and I really want to circle back to that. What are some actions you encourage among youth?
Yes. It's so important. I'm hearing a lot of action and hope dynamics. And something we use a lot at the Climate Hub is this term of messy hope. And this idea that there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of climate trauma, but there's also this really needed space to ground ourselves in hope and deep care and joy and happiness at the same time. And so how do we make this space for messy hope in relationship to action? And I want to go back quickly to talking to youth. So when we think about talking to youth, we can break it up into 3 general categories. You've got kind of like 3 to 7-year-olds, 8 to 13, and then kind of 14 to 18. Start early, have these conversations very young, and again, be age appropriate. You can focus on principles of care and relationship to nature, for example. Go outside, have walk and talks about the need and relationships of how we connect to air and water and plants, and how we both need air and water, and how we both need things to come out of the soil. Think about conversations you can have with young kids about building relationships of care to nature. And then from 8 to 13, start having conversations about community awareness. How does community work? How does it function? What are the dynamics of a community? What are our obligations to community? How do we care for community? Thinking about, fostering that idea of systems. What are they? Making connections to how our actions ripple out into the world. What does that look like as a consumer? As, again, not trying to also place all climate action as an individual level engagement. Think about it from different levels and strategies. What does it mean to do it from an individual level? That care base, that self-mindfulness. Thinking again about a level of community or collective engagement. And thinking about it from a systems level as well. I think those are some different actions.
Thank you very much. You've laid it out very well there. I have about a minute left. Just love to get one last word on action from Kai-Chan.
Yeah, it is key, and we do need to do it together. What we suggest for folks at CoSphere, which is a community of small planet heroes, a project of UBC, it's at cosphere.net. What we suggest is that a part of it is to keep learning so that we keep identifying those ways that we can have meaningful action in the context of these complex systems. We have to move away from the idea that there's like 1, 2, or 3 easy things that we can do for the climate. It's not like that, right? It's going to require sustained efforts. And it's going to not just be our own private actions, right? Where we get the big global economic problems downloaded on us as individuals. We need to take actions that signal our values and change those systems.
Really want to thank you both for joining me this afternoon. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Megan Wise at UBC's Climate Hub and Kai Chan, a professor at UBC. Some breaking news in Harrison Hot Springs. Mayor Ed Wood has just declared a state of emergency in the village. The water treatment facility, they say 2 of the 3 pumps have failed. We will have much more on this on CBC for you. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you so much for joining us.